Please give a very warm welcome to Peter Brötzmann. In the intro, we've listened to a piece by Maurizio Kagel, an Aufnahmezustand, which is from 1969, and that was recorded in Cologne. And I figured it's kind of important to explain that there will be many cities that we're going to mention in this talk, and they're all about 20 minutes away from each other, so just ignore the city names. It's one big region. We might get specific about it, about Düsseldorf versus Cologne versus Wuppertal, but they're like literally like 20 minutes away from each other. But you were born in Remscheid, to mention another one.
Yeah, I was born in Remscheid, a middle-sized industrial town at the border of the Ruhr area. And in 1941 it was, I think. And yeah, I grew up there, usual school, high school, and so on. And yeah, my goal in the very early years was to be a painter, and I did that with quite some intensity. But music, and especially jazz music, was always on my side. And we had, at the high school, we had a kind of swing Dixieland band with a very good clarinet player.
Who was that?
I forgot his name. I don't know, but he was very good. But he had to leave school, and I grabbed his clarinet and started to play with my few records I had at that time. So, and drove my parents and neighbors crazy. But yeah, the whole shit started in Remscheid because we had a kind of swing bebop band there already with some advanced students from the Folkwang school in Essen. And so I joined them from time to time and with my clarinet, and they didn't send me home. So I started to tour with them, and then, of course, one day they said, okay, Brötzmann, you need a saxophone. We need a saxophone in the band. So I organized myself a tenor saxophone and started to play. But at that time, still, my goal was being a painter. I studied at the Werkkunstschule in Wuppertal, which is a kind of following thing of the Bauhaus schools, for example. I started advertisement, to study advertisement, graphics, paintings, and so on.
I would like to actually show a picture from the early 60s that shows you, and it shows some other artists, and then maybe you could explain to people. Yeah. It's not your artwork. Please look at picture number 1.
Oh yeah, this is...
that's actually you on the bottom left, right?
Yeah, must be. It changed a bit. Yeah, that is a photo from a June Paik exhibition we did in '61 in Wuppertal.
63, sorry.
63 is that one? Yeah, okay. And we had, I just had finished my studies at the art school, and there was quite an avant-garde gallery in Wuppertal called Parnasse, and this guy was really very active, inviting artists from all over the world, and one of them was very young June Paik from Korea. And I was lucky to assist him for this exhibition and some following stuff in Holland, Amsterdam, and so on. And he, I think, was the first really important person for me in my little art life. And via him, I learned to know Joseph Beuys, who started his activities in these years in mainly Düsseldorf at the Academy. And another important group of artists were the Fluxus group, with George Jonas as the leader of the administration, and Emmett Williams and a lot of others. So that was, looking back now, this 60 years, a very important influence, and influences just before I met some great guys from the jazz world. At the same time, early 60s, Stockhausen opened his electronic studio in Cologne. He was running, together with Mary Baumeister, a small theater in Cologne, and he invited people like Cage and Tudor, for example. So that was, beside being busy with the jazz music, my other very important influence.
I would like to just, sorry to interrupt you, but maybe so people get a bit more of an idea what June Paik did, whose assistant you were. The picture we saw earlier has a cut-off head of an actual ox in the entrance of an exhibition that I think was referred to as the first media art exhibition in the world.
I mean, he explained it like that if they have a big festivity in Korea, they put over the door the head of the animal which has been eaten for the later dinner. So I was sent to the slaughterhouse in Wuppertal and organized the head of this bull. And now we nailed it over the door. And neighbors complained a couple of days later, so we had to get rid of that again. But June Paik, at that time, he was about 30 or something like that. He was living in Cologne, and he came out of, let's say, the Cage school in a way. He was working a lot with prepared piano stuff, and already in this early 60s, he started what he got famous for in the later years, TV experiments. So you, I was lucky to be a part of that very early development of his life, his artistic life. And the good thing was that we stayed good friends until he died. And at the same time, you could hear in Germany a lot of music, a lot of jazz music. The bands were touring in Europe. I've heard all Miles Davis bands. I've heard all Coltrane Quartet, or Coltrane with Eric Dolphy, or Coltrane with Adderley, and whatever was there, or Sonny Rollins, or Art Blakey was all over the place. And so we got a lot of very different information. And the good thing on my side was that I got the other side of it. That means the experience with June Paik, with Joseph Beuys, and even early Stockhausen I liked very much, which told me and taught me I don't have to take care. And Paik always came when we played concerts in Wuppertal and surround. He passed by and said, nobody liked my music in these years, of course, just a handful of friends. But he always said, Brötzmann, go ahead, do it, do whatever you can. And so I learned very early not to take care about the rules, just to make my own rules. And that's what I'm still trying to do.
Do you feel like you learned about shock value from Paik? You see, he did things like he put up this ox head, and I think he once like attacked Keiji and David Tudor and cut their clothes with scissors during one of his concerts. Did that influence you in a way that you knew you wanted to play extreme?
No, that was anyway there. I didn't know any influence for that. But of course, it encouraged me. I still have some letters from boys at home. He always said, Brötzmann, do your shit, do your thing. And I mean, the press material I got out of these years, they all said that's no music anymore, that's no jazz, that's no nothing. So it was very, very helpful to have people like that on my side. And I just didn't have to care, I just developed my own stuff. And then, on the other hand, I got very early in touch with a lot of American musicians, like Cecil Taylor in the mid of the 60s, or Don Cherry, who was living in these years in the south of Sweden, but working a lot in German radio stations. Or Steve Lacy, who was living in Paris, and Carla Bley, is a piano player. And I started to work with some of them, which was for me, as a very young and foolish guy, very important to establish my own things.
On which level did you discuss politics with these people? Because you just mentioned 3 American artists, Don Cherry and
I mean, in general, the 60s were quite a violent times. And if you think back what happened in the 60s in the States, the riots in Washington, D.C., in Detroit, wherever in the South, people still were lynched in the South and disappeared, and Martin Luther King was killed, Jeff Kennedy was killed, and on the other hand, our generation of the after-war guys, we wanted one thing. We wanted to get rid of all the remains of Nazi stuff. I mean, the whole Adenauer government was still full of old Nazis.
Adenauer was, just to explain, he was the first chancellor of Germany after the war from, I think, 49 to 63.
Yeah, yeah. And so I always was, we didn't get any answers from our parents. They didn't want to talk about. So I had to, or we in general had to find answers for our questions somewhere else. And my first connection, of course, it just was crossing the border in 2 hours, being in Amsterdam. And Holland was the first country I experienced a fresher air and a freer life. And I, for example, had my first exhibitions I had in Holland. The first contacts, international music contacts, were to some Dutch guys like Misha Mengelberg or Han Bennink or Willem Breuker. I worked with them. With Bennink, I'm still working with from time to time. And Holland was a very important place for me. I was setting up with some other colleagues June Paik's exhibition in Amsterdam in the famous Gallery 47 and things like that. So Holland was for me, I even had a small place in Amsterdam for some years. So it was a country of some kind of freedom in a way. And at the same time, the first contacts developed to the British musicians like Derek Bailey, Tony Oxley, Johnny Stevens, and a lot more. So it was time for really international contacts. And I must say, when I started to build up my own bands, I never had a German band. It was from the very beginning a very international scene with the Swedish drummer Sven-Åke Johansson, or with then the Dutch friends like Bennink and Willem Breuker, and with the English guys, Evan Parker and so on. And now it happened in the mid of the 60s, I was invited to the first bigger festivals in Germany, like the Frankfurt Festival, which was the biggest at that time in Western Europe, I think. And so, at least I got quite some attention. And because of that international connections, I was able to set up bands like the Machine Gun Band from '68, which included two drummers, Sven-Åke Johansson and Han Bennink, a bunch of saxophone players, Evan Parker, Willem Breuker, myself, Gerd Dudek, and two bass players, Buschi Niebergall and Peter Kowald, just to name some.
I would like to play a bit of that. It's still one of your most famous pieces. But before we play that, I would like to understand more, or have you explain more how it felt to make art in a place where everyone who's older than 40 or older than 45, 50 at the end of the 60s was technically part of, well, a nation of mass murderers. How do you deal with that? How do you get up in the morning when you're 19 and you want to make art, knowing that that is the generation of your parents?
No, yeah, I mean, the trauma of my generation was what our fathers had done to the rest of the world. And so we said, never again. And that was the whole impetus through all my life, and it still is. And looking back to 60 years of making music, and then seeing at the moment coming up the brown nationalistic sauce and poisoning the groundwater everywhere in the world, it's quite a sad moment, I must say. But that was our thing, never again. Never nationalism again, never all that what our fathers had done. So, and that was luckily the same mood with most of the Europeans I had the chance to work with. Like, it was not only the Dutch and the English, a little later came the Danish and the Swedish and the Norwegian guys. So it was really a big community, and the good thing was that not only all the artists were in the boxes, oh, he is a musician, he is a theater man, he is a writer, he is a painter. We all had to do something together. And it was really a time of a large community Europe-wide. And that's what I'm missing nowadays, of course. But that was a very important thing for us.
To sort of cross the borders and work together, where just 20 years before you literally would have had to cross the border, the front of a war.
Right, yeah. Yeah.
You might hate me for that, but I want to play one video that just explains a bit more, or shows a bit more, what Germany was like in the year that Machine Gun came out, which was in '68. So
68, just 50 years ago.
We're only gonna make it through 53 seconds of it, but this was #1 in Germany in 1968. Please play video number 4. Can we have the next one really loud, please?
Now, yeah, you can imagine that for the audience was quite a challenge.
I just want to say which track it was, so everyone, this was Machine Gun with your original octet, so the original recording of Machine Gun, I think, recorded in a club in Bremen, and before we saw a video of Heintje, that is where he sings that sort of surrounded by older people in Germany with all the connotations that we mentioned before, and it's literally a lullaby that is saying, let us forget about the pain in the world. And that same year you made this recording.
Yeah, and the funny thing is Heintje was of course a Dutch guy, and going to Holland in these early years, right after the war, it was for a German not so easy. I remember when I got my first friends in Amsterdam and I rented this little space and I was going around. That was in the old Jewish part of Amsterdam, it's a Kalkmarkt. I was going around buying rolls and a piece of cheese or so. And of course, people realized, oh, he is German. I didn't get served. So my friends took me on the hand, showed me around. This is a good one. So next day I got my cheese and rolls. But it was not so easy. Besides that, of course, collaboration between the musicians was very, very successful in a way. But you can imagine playing this piece of music at a German jazz festival in '68, where mostly people like to listen to, let's say, Dave Brubeck or modern jazz quartet. It was quite something else for them. So the reaction of the press were like that. But on the other hand, especially, I started to set up my own record label in '66. I produced the first record then, and Machine Gun was the second one. At the same time, the Dutch friends and the English comrades, they founded their first record labels like ICP in Holland and Incas in England. And so it was really a good collaboration going on. And the interest for the music was growing, slowly, but it was growing. And yeah, especially the contacts to the Americans were growing bigger and bigger, so I went. My first visit to the States was in the early 70s, but I had played already in Europe with Carla Bley's European Quintet and with a lot of Steve Lacy's band. Don Cherry invited me for his band in playing in Paris for a week, and so on.
Maybe we should play another video from sort of 1970, around 1970, with Globe Unity Orchestra, so you can get a bit of an idea. That was mostly European people, I believe.
Yeah, that's right.
Can we watch video number 1, please? This was Drunken in the Morning Sunrise, your composition. It's a long time ago, so I don't know, 48 years with the Globe Unity Orchestra.
I mean, the Globe Unity Orchestra was founded more or less by Alexander von Schlippenbach, the piano player, and we had the band together in the mid-60s, a composition for the Berlin Jazz Fest, which was called Globe Unity. And then we revived it in the 70s with quite a, sometimes 20-piece band, with all the English guys, with the Dutch and Belgian guys, and with American guests like Anthony Braxton, Steve Lacy, and a lot more.
I wanted to play that not at last because it shows you on stage, and you had mentioned earlier that there were a lot of disciplines that influenced you, and you were still working as a painter. But why did you prefer expressing yourself through music and stopped?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know exactly. I mean, I continue doing the painting stuff and so on. But for some reason, the music took more and more over. And I think, looking back, it was always the experience to work on the same thing with a bunch of guys. I mean, it's a nice feeling if you are in your studio and come to a point where you can say, okay, this, let's say, painting is finished and it looks all right, or you threw it in the oven or whatever. But to work on a thing with a group of people and create something together, it's another feeling, and it's a much more intense feeling in a way. And besides that, I like travel. I liked seeing other countries, other people, and that the music combines and still does. I'm still very curious about, there are a lot of countries I haven't been, so I'm always looking forward.
I want to play a bit of a piece again that we had already listened to in the intro. So this is a piece by a composer called Mauricio Kagel, who lived and worked in Cologne at that moment, and he recorded you. He recorded quite a few people. He recorded you saying that in that part you're saying that you're not a good clarinet player. And Mauricio Kagel was working a lot with the ideas of theater in creating music. So he put you in studios and sort of secretly recorded you, and then used all the bits that you said in between the performances that you thought you had come in for. And I'm curious, you being exposed, this is from '69, you having been exposed to that at the time, this like very conceptual art, how, and if at all, that went into your performances as a sax player.
Yeah, I mean, this recording situation was really very special. I had met Kagel, I don't remember where, But then he invited me for a couple of days to the studio in Cologne. I brought my horns with me, and he had me play certain things. And besides that, we were talking. There was this Kaskel was his name, the drummer for contemporary music at that time. And we talked. And at the end, I think he didn't use any of my saxophone playing. I think he just used our talks. And the good thing with Kagel was that he had a great sense of humor, and he understood what jazz music is about. Maybe for him as an Argentinian, it was a bit easier as for a stupid German. Yeah, I just liked the guy, and I liked him because of he was inventing all the time very special stage situations. He built it up, really fantastic stages, built it up his own instruments or instrument machines played by two people, really big constructions. And it was always fun to be with him.
And this humor that you're describing that he had is something that can be found in many of your recordings of that time. Much later you played with Keiji Haino, and I think I can only think of two people coming up with track titles of that sort of level of absurdity, and that's Keiji Haino and it's Han Bennink, who you played a lot with in the 70s. So was that also a way to deal with the still quite desperate situation in Germany, or the desperate memory?
I wouldn't go so far. I wouldn't. No, I mean, yeah, I mean, to deal with a situation you don't like and you want to change, humor is quite a good way to work with that. And Bennink, of course, did it in his own way. And I started to work with Keiji Haino about 30 years ago. And Keiji is one of the guys, he can touch everything, every instrument or whatever, and make something out of it. And that's a very special gift. And
maybe I should illustrate the sort of Bennink's humor by playing just the last 30 seconds of a track that is named after your name, and it sounds like he's trying. It's just Han Bennink saying your name, not really saying it.
Yeah, I mean, he still is a funny guy after all these years. Yeah, I mean, what to say? It was just fun to do and to react on sometimes not so easy situations.
So you started touring a lot in the 70s, but still had sort of graphic design business and a family by that point at home.
I dropped the advertisement business. I had to do because I had to feed the family somehow. But I dropped that in the late 60s already. So, and then the kids were old enough, my wife could go to work and I could travel around and play some music. And I must say, without my wife, I wouldn't have made it. Yeah.
Because she let you play and
yeah,
provided a stable income.
Yeah, most of the girls say, oh, you better stay home and do a decent job. But she always encouraged me, do your thing, and
how was on your side as a musician, the funding situation at that point in Europe, in Germany, and which role did radio stations play in providing a stable income?
Yeah, compared to nowadays, the radio stations were really a great help. I mean, we always complained, of course, but if I look back, radio stations like the small station in Bremen, the big station in Hamburg, even the conservative station in Cologne, and the Südwestfunk in Baden-Baden, they all provided us with some work from time to time. Or we could use a studio, or they did some studio concerts, or they had a little money that I could invite some guests. And that, of course, is all gone. That is not happening anymore. But in these years, it was a big help to survive.
Even though you didn't really work in advertisement anymore, you made all the record covers for, well, most of the record covers for your own recordings and record covers for a few other people. Can we please look at picture number 5? This is a recording by the Brötzmann group in 1970, a record called Fuck the Boere, dedicated to Johnny Diani, and that it also has, by the way, a version of Machine Gun on it. And I wanted to ask you about this particular artwork and also obviously the title and the dedication of the record.
Maybe first a word to Johnny Diani. Johnny Diani was a bass player coming with a bunch of guys from South Africa. They were able to escape, and they first stranded in Switzerland, but then were able to move to England. And of course, whenever we were together, there was Johnny Diani, Louis Morlow, Dudu Pugwana, and Chris McGregor, and other guys. We, of course, we talked about their experience in South Africa, and whenever it came to this white South Africans, Johnny Diani was shouting, "Fuck the Boer," which means, you understand, fuck these guys. And so I dedicated this piece to him. And the artwork in the back, what was it? Yeah, I at that time, it's from early 60s, I think. I was working with a lot of collage things, and nothing special to say about it.
Don't be that humble.
It's just a kind of mummy under some blankets.
So it's not related to the title of the record in any way.
No, you can draw a line if you want, but it was at the origin, it was not connected to the title now.
But you were aware of things going on in the whole world, basically. And there's one track. There's actually someone asked me that before this talk. But the question that came up was how much you were aware of another track also called Machine Gun by a guitar player called Jimi Hendrix that came out 2 years after yours. And if you knew how that sort of connected to politics in the US?
I mean, the title Machine Gun is always leading to some wrong conclusions. The name, it was a nickname Don Cherry gave me because of my playing. But of course, it was happening in '68. It had straight connection to the war in Vietnam and things like that. Yeah, I know Hendrix used the title a couple of years later, yeah.
But that's not like, there was never a possible meeting of the two of you on any sort of connection, because he actually uses drums that are machine gun-like. I don't know, should I play it? You know, people know it, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe I play just a tiny bit in the middle. Jimi Hendrix with a machine gun, obviously. I just really wanted to play these drums because he particularly aims at sort of recreating that sound. And there are a few of your recordings coming in the 70s that also have recorded, sort of field recording bits in there, or actually concrete sounds, such as, for example, the stuff you did with Bennink on Schwarz White. So can I imagine you at one point getting a recorder and sort of making that part of your music, or was it other people bringing that in?
I didn't get your question. I'm sorry.
That's definitely the fault of my question and my cold. So Jimi Hendrix, I use this as a segue because Jimi Hendrix has his drummer play the drums as a machine gun. And then in the recordings, some of your recordings that came later, in the 70s, for example, such as Schwarz White, there are actual recordings of concrete sounds that you or the other musicians are bringing in, such as of birds, etc.
Yeah, but that was just a situation we recorded Schwarzwaldfahrt in the Black Forest.
So there's no layering of any sounds in that. It's not like you got into tape slicing at that point.
No, we had... we went by car. It was quite winter time still. We had the allowance to drive through the Black Forest, and we got some very simple recording equipment from the Südwestfunk, and we recorded wherever we liked to stay. We unpacked instruments, or we used the lakes and the water and the trees and whatever we found, and we're making noise with drums and saxophones and clarinets. It was a very nice trip, I must say.
And you were still mostly playing woodwind instrument. There was no branching out into recordings techniques on your side.
No. It was just pure as it is, yeah.
You and Han Bennink, who has been mentioned several times by now, a Dutch multi-instrumentalist, mostly a drummer who you went to a forest in Germany with called the Schwarzwald, and made this really sort of experimental recording, or in a different way experimental than your massive jazz bands.
Yeah, it was Bennink and we always enjoyed nature, and we had something to do at the radio in Baden-Baden, and we had, at that time, quite an important guy was running the jazz department there, Joachim Ernst Behrendt. We talked to him, hey man, what about going to the nature and do some field recordings? And he made that possible, and so we had a week of driving around different places. It was very cold still and very unpleasant weather, but we enjoyed that very much. So it's quite a unique document of that times, I would say.
You had still until this day, have never seen a teacher, right? So there's this level of experimentation that different levels of experimentation on all these records from this time. Did you reach points where you felt like I envy other people playing their saxophones or being able to play their instrument in a way that you just can't, despite having all these ideas?
I mean, look at all the guys coming out now from the music schools and conservatories, they can play much better saxophone than I can do. But that's not about music. Music is about finding out what's happening with you, finding out what's your voice, what is your ability to produce, create something. And you know, I grew up with blues music, and if you listen to the very early blues, I mean, these guys could play with one string on the guitar box, but they could play music. So it's not about technique, or technique is just the thing you develop for your own, and if you need to know some more, you work as hard as the point you reach it, and then the next case shows up. In the case of jazz music, I don't believe in teaching. I mean, it's always good to learn. It's good to learn about composition, to learn about contrapoint, to learn even about the instruments, the up and downs, the scales, and so on. But if you don't know what to do with it, then you better sell the horns. That is, and I'm very skeptical about all these conservatories, and I don't think that's a good solution for the music. And if it goes on like that, jazz music comes back to a kind of academic exercise, and for sure I don't need that.
I would like to, before we very soon, I think, open this up to questions, show one video with one of your frequent later, but that means the last 30 instead of the last 60 years, later collaborators, Keiji Haino, Keiji, video number 5, please. There was an excerpt of a show of yours in Super Deluxe in 2008, or Super Deluxe, a club in Tokyo. How does this collaboration work? How has it evolved over the last 30 years? And most importantly, how do you and Keiji Haino, sorry, communicate about music?
Yeah, that's a funny thing. My first longer trip to Japan was in 1980, and I was there with my drummer comrade Bennink. And since that time, I started to love that country, and I went nearly every year. And you know, you have to have a kind of management over there. And the management we had was the same who was at that time busy with Keiji Haino too. And Keiji was a kind of uprising star in the rock scene in Japan. And so we decided, okay, let's do something together. And one of the following years, we did a 3 weeks tour, just Keiji and myself. And communication was difficult because at that time, he didn't speak any English, or he didn't want to speak any English. And so we were sitting in the car for 3 weeks, touring, driving, playing, with nearly not speaking to each other. I mean, we had our guy, our driver and agent, he was translating more or less the most necessary things, but there was not really a kind of personal thing possible. And at that time, I had the feeling he even didn't want it. But we did our weeks, we did our concerts, and for some reason we stayed in touch. And over all the decades, we worked and we developed, and year by year his English was getting better. And nowadays we just finished a short tour at the US West Coast. I would say we are quite good friends, which is not so easy to say with a Japanese comrade. But
I guess you wouldn't understand each other.
No, Japanese people, it's not so easy. It's always a certain distance. I know some of the guys really very long, and it's still a distance. But nowadays,
I disagree with that? But still, I'm curious about how do you actually communicate, or did you communicate when it came to playing together? What with someone like Keiji Haino? What is the communication that is happening during improvisation?
I mean, what is improvisation about? You have what you can do yourself. You have the partner who's there, who brings in his own stuff, and then you try to fit, or you try to fight, but it's a kind of personal feeling that you know it works. And if it wouldn't have worked from the very beginning, we wouldn't have proceeded with it. I mean, it's just, as I said, after all these years, we are really good friends, and I learned to know him as a very sweet guy with a lot of humor and a lot of fun with him. So, but if it comes to stage, we still are at point zero and we start again. And
I once spoke to someone else who coincidentally you made a record cover for Badada Leo Smith, and he said to me that the most important thing in improvisation on stage is that you know when it's over, so that you know when you've reached a point where a track has to end. What would you say is the one thing that you need to know as an improviser?
I think the start of every concert is very, very important, as well as the end too. And to find the right ending is really a thing you learn by long experience. And a bad sign, if I'm working with younger people or not so experienced people, if they think they haven't played enough, they have to put on one more piece, one more thing, until the music really gets boring. No, it's very important that you have the ears for, okay, that's it. And for example, the guy I'm working longest with is Han Bennink, and we still see each other from time to time. Just recently we played a couple of duo things together. And I mean, that's what we know, to make the right ending. And the same it is with Keiji.
Can we just briefly look at picture number 9, please? I just wanted to show this because this is how Han Bennink looks like nowadays, who's Peter's longest collaborator. I would like to, before we open this up to questions, play a very new release of you and someone you've toured with a lot recently in the last, I think, 2 or 3 years, and that's Heather Leigh, and there's a new record called Sparrow Nights, and we're going to listen to the title track. Do you have a rough idea which number in your overall discography this would have been, this recording?
No, I don't know.
An estimate?
I don't count. I have no idea. It must be over 200 nowadays, I think. But it's the last one, yes. And
the newest one?
The newest one, yeah. Not the last one, no. There's more coming. And yeah, I work with Heather Leigh now for 3 years. And she's playing a very funny instrument, a pedal steel guitar, which usually is an instrument used in country and bluegrass music. But she found a way to play it really very different. And, you know, all my life long I was together with bass and drums, and I know all about it. And this instrument, and especially Heather playing it, that is for me quite a new challenge. And she is a very strong woman. She knows what she wants. And so it's quite a fight going on, which I, of course, like. Yeah.
One of very few women that you've worked with. You work with her, you work with Carla Bley, but that's many years ago.
Yeah, there were some women in between, but the thing, they all disappeared after a while. It's a hard life, and I mean, nowadays you see a lot of women playing saxophones, or, yeah, it's coming more and more. I like women, I have nothing against. I like good players, and if they are good, I don't care if they are female or male or whatever. So let's see how long people last. Music is a long-term thing. It's a thing of continuity, and so you have to be patient.
There's a record you did with Han Bennink called Still Quite Popular After All These Years. And with these words, I'd like to say thank you, Peter Brötzmann, for coming.
Thank you. And thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And of course, you know the game by now. We've got a microphone in the room, and yeah, all these people can ask you questions. They might, I think it's always nice to just say your name and where you're from, because you all know by now, but Peter doesn't.
Hello, my name is Quinn, I'm from London. Hi. Here I am. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm also a saxophonist, and it's been really interesting to hear that. It's a very different talk to what we've had this week, so it's really nice to hear. I was just wondering, because I saw your show last night, and you were speaking just now about fitting and fighting, and I was wondering if you would be able to talk about how, if that's something that you consciously discuss as a group beforehand, and in the case of last night, is there some sort of plan in terms of who's going to take what role, and if you're going to fit or fight, or yeah, just anything about that.
I mean, yesterday, I must say it was not the right place to present the music. And the strongest fight I had yesterday was with a fucking sound engineer. That was really, he wasn't worth his money.
What did you...
So that's one side. But when we go on stage, for example, as a duo with Heather or with our friend Sabu, no, we don't discuss what we do before. We just know what we have, what we can do, what we are able to do, and we listen and we see how things develop. And of course, you don't invent every night something new. And especially I'm now 77. I have my language, I have even, you can call it repertoire. I use certain things every night, maybe the same, but I use them always in a different context. I play them different. It's just a kind of material which is there, what improvising means. You use what you have. And you have to put that in the context to the guys you're working with. And I know Sabu now for 40 years, for example, and I know what an excellent drummer he is, but sometimes he surprised me with something new. So I have to react. I can go with him, I can go against him, but being on stage is not a friendly business. Being on stage is a fight, even if you stay there with the best friend, but you have to fight. And maybe that's my very personal meaning, but it's like that. And you need tension, you need challenges, you need a new situation, you have to react, and that makes the music alive, I think.
Hi, my name is Marie. I really agree with what you said. What about if you're alone? You're playing alone. And yes, maybe you will have tension with the sound engineer or the sound guy. What if you don't? Is there a fight anyways?
Yeah, it's a fight with yourself. Of course, I do quite a bit of solo playing, solo performances. And it's a fight then with yourself and with the surrounding. And usually the solo concerts are taking place in smaller venues, so luckily I don't need a sound engineer. No, it's a fight with yourself, and it's the challenge to keep these guys sitting there, to keep a kind of tension going on. And I mean, if you're on stage, if you are in a good mood, in a bad mood, if your body is fucked up, or if you don't feel like, but you have to work. You have to do what you can. And these minutes on stage, you give everything. There is nothing can be hidden or so. It's you just open up yourself. And that's it, with all the bad and hopefully some good things. So that's a challenge with playing the solo. It's sometimes I wish while playing solo, oh, it would be nice to have a drummer on my side, just to get a little bit support. But solo playing is a different thing, and it needs a certain dramaturgy, and you know, in earlier times, when I started to play solo concerts, I made a kind of concept, or I wrote down certain things I wanted to do, and it never worked. It never, I threw the paper away, and I learned that very fast. You are just there, and you open up, and you play your ass off. That's all you can do. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Philip. I'm from Köln.
A little louder, please. Is that
hi,
possible?
I'm Philip. I'm from Köln, Cologne. And I was really interested in what you were talking about in regards to the sort of academiazation of music, and especially jazz music. And I wanted to ask you if you ever had to sort of go up against people who didn't see what you were doing as valuable because you don't have a classical training background. And
Oh,
if this
so
was an issue.
I'm doing that all my life. Still, after all these years, I got that. But that was always fun. I didn't care about. No, music is something different. No, just do your thing. That's all you can do.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Laura. I'm from Istanbul. When it's time to improvise with a person who is totally new at this, how would you direct that person? Like, what would you be your first words to that person to, introduce the improvisation?
I don't think there is a recipe for that. I mean, if you have your senses together and if you're able to listen and to feel, then that's enough. There is no recipe to say do it that way or do it that way or this is important or no. You have to feel it. I mean, I play a lot of places, you can say all over the world. And a lot of times people come to me and say, man, I never have heard that kind of shit before, but I'm so touched. Or if some young girls coming to you after the concert and crying because they couldn't take it, then I think that's a good sign that you can reach somebody. And I think, of course, we as performers, as musicians, we need, of course, open people in the audience. The audience is half of the thing. And I think you don't need to know anything about. You have to feel. That's the main important thing. And if you doesn't feel anything, it's fine too. You feel something else with other things, so it's not a big deal.
I just thought of something with Marie's question earlier, because you talked about your body sometimes not feeling up to playing. And you have traveled a lot, not only a lot, I mean, you have basically traveled playing for the last 55 years, I guess. And specifically when it comes to sleeping and when it comes to drinking alcohol, what are your takeaways on how to maintain your sanity?
Yeah. I mean, in a way, I had two lives. I was drinking from my very young years, being together with always older musicians, and that was a time in the 50s or so, drinking was the main drug you could have. And I was drinking at the end, I was drinking for 3 lives, I would say. So, but then you have to listen to the body. And then one night the body said, no, man, that's it. And so I stopped. That was exactly 2000. And I must say, if I wouldn't have done that, I wouldn't sit here. I would be dead for a long time. So it's a question of, I mean, there are a lot of other drugs nowadays around, and I must say, inside the field of musicians, it's not used very much anymore. So most of the guys are very disciplined, here and there a whiskey or something, but inside the musician's world, it's not the drugs, at least in my part of musician's world. It's not an issue nowadays. But I mean, this way of life, touring hotels for a couple of hours, getting up, alcohol was always a kind of medicine to keep me going. I thought so, and it was like that. I don't regret anything, but then when the body tells you if you can't move on stage the way you want to move, then you better look a little bit what's going on with you. And so that's why I stopped. And I must say I feel quite all right with that. It's much easier to get a bit stoned or drunk through the world and through security and all that daily bullshit you have to do. But on the other hand, if it comes to the work, I like to have a sober mind in a way, yeah. Yeah.
Is there anyone else wanting to ask a question here? I don't think there is. Can we? No, yeah, it is.
Hi, I'm Joan from Barcelona, and I was wondering, what kind of music do you listen at home?
Yeah, that's a nice question. A lot of Duke Ellington, a lot of old jazz, or old whatever, a lot of Ellington, Monk, and blues. I have a big library of blues recordings. And on the other hand, to tell you the truth, if I come from a tour and through the horns in the corner, I'm glad to hear nothing. Yeah.
Thank you.
I guess it's time to switch my mic back on. I guess it's time to say thank you to all of you for listening, and to Peter Brötzmann for visiting us. Thank you.
No, I have to thank you for your interest, and I hope it wasn't too boring. So thank you very much. Thank you. Okay.